Bully slapped black boy in the face at diner, not knowing his Mafia boss father saw it all. It wasn't just a slap. It was a message, a declaration, a reminder for everyone watching that some people still believe power came with skin color, with the cut of a jacket, or with the weight of a last name. The boy didn't cry. That would have given the moment more dignity than it deserved. He just stood there, frozen in place, with a milkshake dripping down his arm and the heat of humiliation crawling up his neck. All around him, the diner paused, forks midair, coffee halfway to mouths, eyes darting, then averting. No one moved. No one spoke. No one helped. And that silence? That was louder than the slap itself. "You shouldn't be here," the bully said, his voice low, cocky, filled with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences. "People like you don't belong in places like this." And the boy, still stunned, still trying to process how a simple stop at a diner turned into a public execution of his dignity, could only whisper, "I didn't do anything." The bully leaned in closer, his breath sour with privilege. Exactly. It didn't start as a confrontation. The boy hadn't stepped out of line. He'd just walked in quietly, with worn-down shoes and a second-hand jacket, looking for something simple, a bite to eat after school, maybe a moment of calm. He'd sat in a booth near the back, minding his business, when the waiter skipped over him like he wasn't even there. He didn't complain. He waited, politely, until the table beside him, filled with loud kids in Letterman jackets and polished sneakers, got served within seconds. That's when he spoke up. "Excuse me. I think you skipped me," he said carefully, respectfully, as if trying not to offend anyone just by existing. The waiter didn't even turn around. But someone else did. The tallest one at the table, broad-shouldered, smug smile, the kind of kid whose dad owned half the neighborhood and made sure everyone knew it. He turned, looked the boy up and down, and smirked. "You skipped him," the bully said to the waiter. "Nah, he's not a customer. He's just here to what? Steal ketchup." The others laughed. And when the boy stood, trying to calmly explain that he'd been waiting for over 20 minutes, trying to assert the most basic form of respect, the bully slapped him. Just like that. No warning. No hesitation. An open palm blow to the face that turned heads and silenced the whole room. And still, no one moved. But someone had seen it. Someone who didn't belong in that room either. A man who blended into the booth in the farthest corner, alone, unreadable, sipping coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. He had watched every second, from the missed service to the laughter to the slap. He didn't flinch. He didn't interfere. Not yet. Because when you come from a world of silence and shadows, you learn. Revenge doesn't scream. It whispers. The boy left the diner with his pride crushed beneath his feet, walking home in the cold with a sting on his cheek and a storm in his chest. He didn't know that the man in the corner followed 3 minutes later, moving like smoke through the front door, sliding his wallet back into his coat, the check untouched on the table. He didn't know that 3 more men in black cars were already waiting across the street. He didn't know that everything was about to change. Because the man in the corner wasn't just a father. He was the kind of man whose phone calls could make bank accounts disappear. The kind of man whose enemies wore suits and smiled, but only above ground. The kind of man whose name wasn't spoken out loud unless you wanted to be remembered, and then forgotten. And now, someone had slapped his son. The next morning, the diner opened like any other day. But the manager's keys didn't work in the lock. The cameras inside were gone. The staff arrived to silence. No customers. No phones ringing. And the table where it all happened burned at the edges, as if someone had taken a lighter to the memory of what had been done. The bully laughed it off. Said it was some gang thing, and that he wasn't worried. Said he had lawyers. Said his dad would fix it. Said too much. Because by the time the story hit the news, not the slap, but what came after, he wasn't laughing anymore. The video leaked. Not the diner's footage that had been erased, but a phone recording, grainy and shaky, taken by someone who hadn't spoken up in the moment, but had captured everything. The slap, the laughter, the silence. And now the whole world was watching. People marched. Celebrities posted. Brands made statements. But none of it mattered to the man who sat in that corner booth. What mattered to him was that the boy never cried, that he never raised a hand, that he stood there, alone, while the world looked away. And that meant one thing. This wasn't over. This wasn't about a slap anymore. This was about a system, about legacy, about power. And the man who had watched it all, he didn't just want justice. He wanted the lesson to be permanent. So, when the bully stepped outside his gated home 2 nights later and found a black envelope on the hood of his father's Mercedes, sealed with wax and nothing else but a single word, watched. That was when it began. Because the truth is, some fathers don't raise their voices. They raise empires. And sometimes, the quietest man in the room is the one who already decided how your story ends. But what did he do next? What happened to the bully, to the diner, to the boy? And how far would a father go to teach the world a lesson it would never forget? You'll want to stay until the very end. Because in this story, justice doesn't knock. It walks right through the front door. Before we begin, we want to send a clear message to every black viewer watching this. You are seen. You are heard. You matter. Tales of Twist stands firmly against any form of racism or discrimination. This story is a work of fiction, but the pain it reflects is real for far too many. If you've ever been overlooked, disrespected, or made to feel like you don't belong, this story is for you. Stay strong. Keep rising. Now, sit back and enjoy the story. And if this message or this story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're just getting started. The boy's name was Malik. 14 years old, quiet, but not shy. A kid who had learned early that silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. He didn't need to be loud to be strong, didn't crave attention, didn't demand space. He simply occupied the corners of rooms with a presence too heavy for his age, shaped by the kind of life most people only read about. Malik was the type of kid teachers remembered, not for outbursts or brilliance, but for how steady he was. Observant, careful, always watching, always listening. There was something behind his eyes, a weight, a knowing, like he had already seen more than he should have and decided not to talk about it. He moved through the world like a chess piece that knew exactly where not to step. He lived with his father in a modest brick townhouse on the outskirts of New Rochelle, New York, a small city just far enough from Manhattan to feel the from the outside. Their house was like any other on the block, tidy hedges, a clean sidewalk, and a front porch that creaked slightly when stepped on. But inside, the air felt different, colder, quieter, sharper. There were no family portraits on the walls, no messy stacks of bills or kids' toys left on the floor. Everything had its place. Everything was intentional. His father, Darius, was the kind of man who people spoke about with lowered voices. No one really knew what he did, exactly, only that he was in business, that he wore tailored suits to the grocery store, and that the few who crossed him didn't do it twice. Tall, smooth-voiced, with a sharp mind and sharper instincts, Darius carried a quiet authority wherever he went. The kind of man whose nod meant more than most men's threats. Malik didn't know all the details of his father's world, and Darius never offered them. There were rules. No questions after 8 p.m., no phones at the dinner table, no company in the house unless approved. And most importantly, always walk with your head high, never give anyone the pleasure of seeing you small. Malik understood the rules. He followed them. But being the son of a man like Darius meant walking a tightrope. At school, he was invisible when he needed to be, blending in with the background to avoid attention. He knew who to avoid, who to nod to, and when to just keep walking. But even then, being smart, respectful, and careful wasn't always enough. Sometimes, the world didn't care how well you followed the rules. It only cared about what it saw when it looked at you. And for Malik, that meant being judged before he ever opened his mouth. He went to West Grove High, a school known more for its football team than its academic rigor. It was a place where last names mattered more than report cards, where the cafeteria had clear lines of status, and where being different, especially being black in a mostly white upper-middle-class environment, came with a silent pressure. Malik didn't complain. He just kept his head down and made it through the days, knowing that no matter how much the world tried to press him into a smaller version of himself, he had something no one could take: his name, his bloodline, and his future. That Saturday afternoon, the air was unusually warm for October. Malik had stayed after his tutoring session with Ms. Porter, his favorite teacher, who always treated him like a young man, not just another student. She had given him an old poetry book to borrow, something about voices and shadows, and he carried it under his arm as he walked into a small 1950s-style diner near the edge of downtown. It was the kind of place with chrome bar stools, checkered floors, and a neon sign that buzzed a little too loud. He'd passed by it 100 times before, but had never gone in. Today felt like the right day. Just a burger and a shake before heading home. He stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly. It was busy, but not packed. A few families, some teens clustered in booths, and an older man at the far end reading a newspaper. Malik found a booth near the middle, slid into the seat, and waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. A waitress walked by twice without glancing in his direction. He sat upright, eyes forward, book still tucked under his arm. He didn't fidget. He didn't call out. He just waited. Then came the voice from behind him. Loud, smug, unmistakably mocking. "Hey, waiter. You missed one. Or are we skipping the scholarship kids today?" The words hit him like cold water. He turned slowly and saw them. 4 boys, all dressed in private school uniforms, blazers too crisp, laughs too sharp. In the center sat Carson Bennett, son of the man who owned half the car dealerships in the tri-state area. Carson was everything Malik wasn't: loud, blonde, privileged. He walked with the confidence of someone who never heard the word no, and he used it like a weapon. His crew laughed as Malik locked eyes with him. "I've been waiting," Malik said calmly, directing his voice to the approaching waiter, trying to ignore the laughter. "Just wanted to order." But Carson leaned in, his voice louder than necessary. "Waiting? Or just loitering?" The other boys snickered. One of them muttered something about charity. Another mentioned shoplifting. And before Malik could say anything more, Carson rose from his seat, walked over, and, without warning, slapped the book from under Malik's arm, letting it fall to the floor with a thud. A silence fell over the diner. That was the moment. It wasn't violent. Not in the way movies portray it. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a brawl. It was a slap, not to the face, but to Malik's existence. A public declaration that he didn't belong, that his presence alone was enough to justify ridicule. And the worst part? No one stopped it. No manager. No staff. No customer. Just eyes that darted away and mouths that stayed shut. Malik bent down, picked up the book, and stood slowly. His cheek burned, not from a physical slap, but from something deeper. He looked around the room, at the people who had seen it all, who had decided with their silence that what happened was fine, that this was normal, that a black boy being humiliated for asking for food wasn't worth defending. He turned and walked out. No words. No fight. Just a quiet retreat. But what no one knew, what Carson and his crew couldn't possibly have imagined, was that someone had seen everything. Someone whose presence they hadn't noticed. Someone who didn't wear a uniform or carry a tray, but commanded far more power than anyone in that room. Sitting in the booth, behind the newspaper, behind the sunglasses, was a man who didn't react with outrage or emotion. Just observation. He watched the slap. Watched his son pick up that book like it was made of glass. Watched him leave, head still high, not because he was unbothered, but because he had been taught never to let them see him broken. And that man, Darius, had already made a call. Not to the police, not to the school, but to someone who owed him a favor. Because this wasn't just about Malik anymore. It was about what happens when the world slaps the wrong boy in front of the wrong man. And as the door of the diner slowly creaked, closed behind Malik, a clock started ticking. Quietly, ruthlessly. And no one in that diner, not even Carson Bennett, realized yet, but their world was about to change. It started 2 weeks later, on a morning that felt exactly like any other. The sky was overcast, the breeze carried that sharp early November bite, and Malik sat quietly by the window in his first period English class. headphones tucked away, eyes scanning the pages of the same poetry book that had once been slapped to the ground. He didn't read the words so much as let them sit there, untouched, while his mind worked in silence. Something had shifted in the air around him. Not at school. The halls were still ruled by the same hierarchy, the same forced smiles and empty stares, but within him. And he didn't fully understand it, not yet. But he could feel it, curling in the pit of his chest like something waking up. Carson hadn't looked at him since the day in the diner. Not once. Not even during practice, not even in the hallways. At first, Malik thought it was guilt, or maybe arrogance, the kind that makes someone pretend you no longer exist. But it wasn't that. It was fear. The kind of fear that doesn't announce itself, but leaks out through nervous laughter and 2 quick glances over the shoulder. Carson walked a little tenser now, talked a little quieter, and he was always checking his phone. The whispers started small. A shipment missing from one of Carson's father's dealerships. An audit. Then came the video, a blurry clip taken inside the diner, showing the exact moment the book hit the floor. No audio, just movement. But it didn't need sound. The silence in that video spoke louder than any voice. It hit the school like a wildfire. Teachers played dumb. Students played innocent. And Carson? Carson disappeared for 2 days. Then came Monday. It was just after 3 p.m. Malik waited outside the school for his usual bus, when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Not flashy, not loud, just clean, tinted, deliberate. The driver stepped out, a woman in her 40s, sharply dressed, who didn't say a word. Just nodded at Malik. He hesitated for a second, eyes scanning the school building, then stepped forward and got in. They drove in silence through unfamiliar streets, turning down narrower roads until the buildings thinned and the concrete turned to gravel. Finally, they stopped in front of an industrial warehouse tucked behind a construction site. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the chain-link fences and broken pavement. Malik stepped out and followed the woman through a side entrance, into a corridor lined with soft yellow lights and exposed pipes. Then he heard voices. Not loud, controlled, measured. He followed the sound through a door left slightly ajar and stepped into a large, dim room where 3 people were seated around a long wooden table. One of them was his father. Darius sat with the stillness of someone who owned the silence. His suit was dark, fitted. He didn't smile. He didn't look surprised. He just gestured for Malik to sit. Across from Darius sat a man Malik recognized instantly from the local news, Robert Bennett, Carson's father. His hair was thinner in person, and his eyes darted like a man too used to power and not used enough to being denied. Beside him sat Carson, not in uniform, not smug, just pale and still, his hands fidgeting beneath the table. Darius spoke first, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that didn't need to be raised. "Tell my son what you said the night you saw that video." Robert shifted uncomfortably. He cleared his throat. I didn't know. About the connection. About who Malik's father was. If I had. Darius cut him off with a glance. "This isn't about who I am. It's about who he is." Finish the sentence. Robert exhaled, then turned to Malik. "I said it was a mistake. That what happened to you should never have happened." Malik didn't respond. He just stared at Carson, waiting. Carson finally looked up. His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who you were." That sentence alone was enough to drain the room of oxygen. Not what you did. Not why you did it. Who? That was all that mattered. It was the kind of confession that didn't apologize. It revealed. Malik leaned back, folding his arms, his voice steady. "So, if I had a different father, it'd be fine?" Carson opened his mouth, but no words came out. Darius stood slowly, stepping around the table until he was face to face with Robert. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't raise his voice. But the room shrank around him. "You built your empire on names. Yours. Mine. You made calls. You bought silence. But what you failed to teach your son was that some lines can't be bought back." Robert looked down. His fingers tapped nervously on the table's edge. "I've lost 3 contracts this week," he muttered. 2 suppliers won't return my calls. The board's on edge. And I don't know what the hell you're planning. Darius didn't blink. I'm not planning anything. Robert looked up, confused. I already did. There was a pause. Heavy. Then Darius turned to Malik. This is your moment. You tell me what justice looks like. Right here. Right now. The room went still. Even Carson stopped moving. Everyone waited. Malik looked at Carson, not with anger, but with something deeper. Pity. Not because Carson was broken, but because he never realized how fragile he was to begin with. Malik's voice came low, deliberate. I don't want money. I don't want headlines. I want truth. Carson swallowed. Then say it, Malik continued. Right now. Say what you did. Say why you did it. Carson looked to his father, then back at Malik. He licked his lips, and for the first time, his voice didn't carry weight, it carried truth. I humiliated you, because I could. Because I thought you didn't matter. Malik nodded. There it is. And then, something unexpected happened. He stood, stepped back from the table, and walked toward the exit. Robert, confused, called out. Wait, that's it. Malik turned, and the answer was simple. No. That's just the beginning. Outside, the night had fallen fully. The air was sharp, but Malik didn't notice. He walked alone, no car waiting this time, no escort. Just his feet on the sidewalk, and his breath in the cold. But everything had changed. Because now the city knew who he was. Not because of his father. Not because of revenge. But because of one truth spoken out loud, in a room that was never meant to hear it. And for the first time, Malik didn't feel small. He felt seen. 3 months later, winter had settled over New Rochelle. Snow clung to the edges of rooftops like quiet memories, and the streets wore a soft hush, broken only by the crunch of tires over icy pavement. Malik walked alone through the courtyard of West Grove High, his breath visible in the air, his stride steady, shoulders back. He had become more than just a student since that day. He was no longer invisible, not because of fear, not because of pity, but because people had begun to see him for who he truly was. Not Darius's son, not the kid from the diner. Malik, the boy who didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't demand, but made the world listen anyway. Inside the school, whispers had shifted tone. Carson no longer sat at the center of the lunch table. His entourage had thinned. His name, once worn like a crown, now carried weight for all the wrong reasons. The video had been just the beginning. Anonymous emails found their way to local journalists, revealing years of misconduct at Bennett Motors, altered deals, bribed inspections, falsified warranties. Every day, a new headline chipped away at the empire Robert Bennett had built on entitlement. 2 dealerships closed. Investors pulled out. The board voted him out quietly, behind polished doors, with nothing but a severance check and a signed NDA to show for it. But reputations don't sign silence. They scream in every empty handshake and closed door. Carson was transferred out of West Grove by mid-January. No formal goodbye, just an absence that echoed in the locker rooms and hallways. He now attended a private boarding school upstate, far away from the city that no longer admired him. Word was, he barely spoke in class. He kept to himself. Some said he was trying to change. Others said he was just hiding. But Malik didn't waste time wondering. He knew people didn't change just because they lost power. They changed when they understood why they misused it in the first place. And that wasn't guaranteed. Darius, meanwhile, became a name people stopped using casually. Whatever he had set in motion, the investigations, the leaks, the quiet pressure applied to all the right pressure points. He had done it without a trace. No police visits. No arrests. No headlines linking him to any of it. But those who mattered knew. And those who crossed lines now thought twice. He didn't gloat. He didn't even speak of it at home. One evening, as Malik set the table for dinner, he paused, looked at his father, and asked, "Did you do all that for me?" Darius met his eyes, steady as always, then said, "No. I did it because someone needed to see that your silence wasn't weakness. It was dignity. And that has power." Nothing more was said. It didn't need to be. Malik's life didn't suddenly become perfect. There are still stairs to climb, moments of doubt, the pressure of being watched for every move he made. But something inside him had shifted. He started writing more, not assignments, not for school, but for himself. Essays. Letters he never sent. Stories about what it means to be seen, to be hurt, to rise anyway. One of his pieces was anonymously submitted by Ms. Porter to a citywide youth writing contest. He won. At the award ceremony, Malik stood in front of a packed auditorium and read his story out loud, a fictionalized version of what happened that night in the diner, with names changed but truth left intact. When he finished, the room didn't erupt in applause. It went still. Then slowly, one by one, people stood. In that silence, Malik didn't feel like a victim or a headline. He felt like a voice. As for the diner, it changed hands quietly. New management. New staff. The walls were repainted, the menu expanded, and a small plaque was installed in the back booth, for those who choose dignity over noise. Most customers never noticed it. But every now and then, someone would pause and ask what it meant. And the story would be told again. This wasn't just about one slap. It was about 1,000 quiet moments when people are told, in subtle and brutal ways, that they don't belong. It was about what happens when power is left unchecked. But more than that, it was about what happens when one boy decides to carry himself like he already knows his worth, even before the world catches up. Now, if you've made it this far, ask yourself something. How many times have you seen someone be disrespected and stayed silent? How often have you measured someone's worth by the surface, their clothes, their accent, the zip code they come from? And most importantly, when the moment comes, when it's your voice that could change everything, will you use it? Let this story be more than just a twist. Let it be a mirror, a lesson, a reminder that justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through actions, through presence, through the refusal to be made small. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel something, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share what part hit you the hardest. And don't forget to subscribe to Tales of Twist for more powerful stories that challenge, inspire, and leave you changed by the end. Because here, every story comes with a turn you didn't see coming.